Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Mete Conversations. I'm joined today with Ola Doudin from BitOasis. She's the co-founder and CEO of BitOasis, one of the fastest growing startups in MENA region. Ola, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Ray. I'm very happy to be on the podcast today. Thanks for hosting me.
I'm in Broken Bow, Oklahoma, so bring in some winter vibes from here. It's great to be able to do this all the way across the world. I want to get started by asking you, before going into the story, and I will add a disclaimer, saying this is not an investment advice. Is now a good time to buy Bitcoin?
So, disclaimer, not investment advice. I'm really taking a long-term view, on this market. So for me, it's all up from here. It's all upside. So yeah, it's always a great time to buy Bitcoin.
That's awesome. All right. So talking about when you got started, for me as someone from the outside, I kind of feel that it was a perfect timing for when you started BitOasis, especially in the region, before the whole kind of first wave of the rise in price of Bitcoin and Ethereum and the whole kind of crypto going more into the masses. So tell me more about how you timed it. How did you look at that when you got started? And was it kind of like thought through in terms of timing, or was it a little bit of luck?
Yeah, I think when everyone looks at BitOasis right now, they're like, "Oh, it's amazing! You guys timed it so well." I mean, there's a bit of a backstory there, like the case with most entrepreneurs and most success, stories. I mean, I think we're still on our journey to becoming successful. So we're not, in my mind, we're not there yet. We're day one, definitely. We're day zero even. So we started BitOasis, actually. We all came together as co-founders. It was myself, Daniel, we've got a third co-founder who's not full-time on BitOasis right now, but it was mainly me and Daniel. We kind of came into all together. It was around 2015. So it was a while back, right? Bitcoin was a few, or maybe like $400 or so at that point. Worked on an initial product, which wasn't exactly what the market was looking for. I mean, it was a multi-sig wallet at that point that we were trying to kind of localize quickly to realize actually what people want is a way to buy and sell, right? The regulation didn't exist at that point. The demand was still very little, I would say, obviously the early adopters. And, we started working along with our lawyers and engaging with different regulators and, really starting those conversations in terms of, how do we roll out that product to the market, right? And how do we do it in a compliant way, in a regulated way? Obviously the licenses don't exist yet. Let's see what other platforms have been doing in other markets. So we're really, through engaging with our lawyers and all of that, figured out a path forward while obviously really investing in self-regulation early on. And that really worked for us. And, obviously we've gone through some bull markets during that period. So around 2017, it's not like what we've seen this time around, right? Like in the beginning of this year or late last year, I would say, in the beginning of this year, that's definitely been the inflection point where I think real adoption of crypto or more adoption or kind of wider adoption of crypto happened in the region. But obviously we've gone through different cycles of growth and we've really invested in the product. We've really invested in our team, our knowledge, and making sure that we've got also, building out a trading platform and like the matching part of it, etc. So there's been a lot of work in the back, including obviously engaging with regulators and really trying to kind of drive that educational part and awareness and, working with different regulators across the UAE. And then, now we're at the point where getting all that massive growth and been obviously the moment leading up to the bull market, all throughout the bull market. And I do think we're still in the bull market, in the middle of it. And I think, people kind of look at what we're doing and, we've closed a round of $30 million, dollars, etc. They're like, "Oh, guys, you've timed it so well. That's amazing." They're like, "Well, we've started years ago, right?"
You were early,
made sure to survive to that point where you've got the breakthrough, right? And you make sure that you're there when your customers need you, and you're there at that point where you've got that hyper growth and you kind of ride that wave. And that's been great. Now, I always kind of, look in retrospect, okay, what we've done. And it's a bit hard to, when you start as a founder or you get an idea and you're like, that's what I want to do, right? It's a bit hard to figure out where are you on the time scale. In my opinion, we were late because you had all those big platforms in different markets and, raising rounds and all of that. So, it's very, very hard to kind of figure out really where you are in the time scale. But when you start rolling out products and, you get some traction and you start really like getting deep in the market, you start getting inputs and data and figuring out where you are. And I think at the point where we've realized, all right, guys, we're actually early, right? Like the playbook to make this successful is like, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, but there are still components that don't exist. And a lot of it was actually regulation, right? And readiness for the banks to work with us.
How long did it take you to get regulated, to get your license?
What? Sorry?
How long did it take you to get your license from when you started until you got your license?
I mean, so we've gotten our initial approvals. I think that was in 2019. So around like 3.5 years after we've launched. And then the final approvals to that, I think it was early 2021. There's different reasons, obviously, why that's the case. But even right now, you could argue that regulation of crypto is still work in progress, not just in the UAE, but, in Saudi, across the region. Obviously kind of starts getting more complicated and harder once you start kind of looking to other markets where central banks are actually banning or making it illegal, right? So, it's a
was
journey.
There a risk? Was there a risk that you wouldn't get your license?
No, I don't think there was a point where we're not going to get licensed, right? I think all the data points, the inputs, the engagements that we've had with regulators, direction in general was this is going to happen, right? So there wasn't any point of time where it was like a China approach. Because, that would have been very easy. Saying a no is an easy one. But I think the position that regulators have found themselves in is that, look, this is the future. And I think they have quickly actually figured that out, that, look, we're going to have to regulate this, right? We're going to be a jurisdiction. And I'm talking actually about different jurisdictions as well, including obviously UAE, Bahrain, Saudi right now, etc. Is that this is here to stay. So there wasn't at any point that we're going to crack down on this, but I think the approach is let's better understand this, and that took time, obviously, and then let's figure out how we can move forward together. It's a very delicate, I think, balance between innovation and regulation, and it's work in progress. I don't think they quite got there. And, us being in the market and doing this regulatory engagement, I'd like to think it helped, and I do think it actually did help. So, we're doing our part, but eventually this ecosystem will have multiple players and multiple regulators and multiple banks and all of that.
You kind of did the pre-work for some of your competitors before they got started.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, yes and no, I think. We're still obviously far ahead when it comes to the UAE, where we've done, quite a lot of investment in terms of making sure we crack this market. And I do think we were the ones that cracked it versus the competition. Bahrain is a jurisdiction where we, until now, still work very closely with the regulators. Figuring out a path forward, right, in Bahrain is something that I think the competition obviously moved much faster on versus us. And rightly so. I think people pursue different strategies based on where they see the opportunity is. And I think markets like Saudi, Egypt, others in the region are up for grabs right now. I mean, they haven't been properly kind of, regulated or crashed. So yes, I think you do see different strategies, different approaches by different exchanges. And yes, we've definitely paved the way to some extent. but I think it's also a responsibility of all the different players in the market eventually. So.
Yeah, definitely. I want to switch talk a little bit about product and your methodology or approach to building out initially your MVP or initial product, and then scaling your product, as well as how do you work with your tech team in terms of figuring out what features should be shipped, your customers are looking for. Do you benchmark that against global players, or do you have other approach to do that?
Yeah, so very good question. I think obviously our first product and the journey we've gone through and our approach even for like product development was very different to what it is right now. So obviously kind of went through like different maturity stages and that journey. I think initially, obviously, we've had conviction that there will be demand in crypto or for crypto in the Middle East. I mean, there's a kind of backstory to this, right? Like I just like struggled for the longest time ever to buy Bitcoin in 2014 to an extent where I had to like message my friends who are like outside of the region until one friend was like, oh, I think I heard about this Bitcoin thing. I have a friend of mine who lives in Canada. He's been like posting about Bitcoin on Facebook. So let me ping him. So he pinged his friend and he's like, yeah, of course I can help her buy Bitcoin. And, we've done it on local Bitcoins, PayPal, obviously ridiculous fees, ridiculous spreads, all of that. But like, I can actually buy Bitcoin now. So it's been like a lot of friction and hassle. Like I don't think, and the average person who wants to buy Bitcoin is willing to go through all of that, and like search their directory. So I was like, okay, there must be like an easier way. Like if I want to buy Bitcoin and I'm struggling, right? I mean, there must be at least a few thousand people right now that want to also buy Bitcoin.
The same, yeah.
Can't find it. And they're not going to pay like 5%. I mean, I think it was even more. It was like 7% or something like that. That's apart from the actual spread, which was a bit hard for me to kind of like figure out, okay, what was the spread? I mean, I wasn't even like that sophisticated at that point to kind of, figure out what's the, exchanges and all that. So anyway, so I was like, at least there are like a few thousand other people that want to do that. And then, now it's like 100,000s and millions of people, right? So it kind of started with this. And I was like, okay, so, well, people want to buy Bitcoin. So it has to be a BTC retail product. People still don't want to pay in Bitcoin or like send money in Bitcoin because, obviously that's not very easy to do. But they want to buy Bitcoin. So let's figure out a way where people can buy Bitcoin. So, we've developed a wallet before, but then the wallet obviously was not, the wallet was just there for people to store their Bitcoin once they buy theirs. But like, it had to be that Rails where people can like buy and sell locally. So then we figured out a product around, that. So a lot of what we're doing is figuring out what people have done in other markets and see how we can like bring it here. But then that quickly obviously changed where, well, people also want to trade. And then, like we've rolled out a trading platform and then, well, people want other tokens. And then we started rolling out other tokens. And a lot of it was driven by the customer themselves, right? I would say qualitatively, right? Because we were still not, the team wasn't big enough. Like we still didn't have the ability or resources to invest in like proper data, teams, analytics and all of that. I mean, stuff that we're doing right now. And now I guess obviously it's a different story, right? Because, we do everything from, UX research, understanding our personas, and even personas we don't have on the platform to like actual, obviously, analytics that we rely on the quantitative side of things. And then you've got the qualitative side of things, right? The feedback your customers are getting, the, sentiment in general, right? Like, how likely they'd like refer the platform. So, obviously like other stuff in terms of, market sentiment or, customer sentiment overall. And it's just a combination of all of that, including the direction the market is heading, right? Because ultimately your customers will tell you what they want, but in 3 to 5 years, what they say they want right now is not necessarily actually what they need or what they want to use. So I think also kind of getting a long view of where the market is heading overall from a product perspective on the retail side of things and figuring out what role potentially we can play there is something that we look at. And I think it's a good example is just seeing what other platforms globally are doing, how certain markets are developing, and then figuring out some lessons learned. So it's like a really combination of different things. One thing that is interesting is that like the crypto space is really very global, and also the customer behavior is also very global. So yes, you've got local demand and a local play to do, but your customers also expect you to be on par, same quality, same level as global platforms, because guess what? They can access them, right? So,
Yeah.
so that's also kind of poses a different type of, like challenge, and just kind of figuring out, okay, so what is the space that I can really play in and compete in is like something we continuously ask ourselves, and like reflect on. But again, it's like, every quarter is like something new. Every even month, I think there's
It's a very
something new
fast
in
pace.
crypto. So yeah, exactly. It's really fun, I think.
How did you solve for validation at the beginning with customers kind of worried to put maybe their money with a local startup in MENA versus somewhere else?
Very good question. And to some extent, I'm trying to actually kind of reflect back, on some of the stuff that that we've done. So here's the thing: I think crypto might be different to other type of markets or spaces where like the early adopters are risk takers by nature, right? Because I mean, you're investing in an asset that is very risky,
Yeah.
and you might as well take a risk on a platform, right? Because you're taking the risk anyway. So I mean, you even see it with like people investing in like smart contracts or tokens, like in DeFi, where it's like, oh, disclaimer is like an unaudited, smart contract, but people still do it anyway. So that's like one thing that we absolutely love as well about people in crypto. I mean, especially in the early days or like early adopters, is that there's a high sense of experimentation and dipping their toes and trying new products, and then also really take risks, right? But again, crypto is a high risk asset,
Yeah.
so please do your own homework, or do your own research. So I think early on, we had the early adopters. I mean, it wasn't difficult to find them. They were like on Twitter and Reddit. So it's like, hey guys, here's a here's a platform. You'll get like whatever bonus if you sign up, and like people just signed up and then they referred their friends and all of that. But yeah, obviously we didn't have a huge customer base at that point, because I mean the crypto adoption wasn't actually really that high. When we've opened up the trading platform, we started actually seeing really nice traction. I mean, mostly like Bitcoin, and then we've rolled out Ethereum trading. I mean, that like really picked up. There was a point where like Ethereum trading was actually higher than Bitcoin. Anyway, but yeah, overall, I think it was like some early referral or like bonus promos we've done, and then it just kind of became like word of mouth. People tried it, they liked it, they've done like few small transactions, they felt like more comfortable, and then it just kind of like took off. But again, like I think it's nothing like what we've seen this time around. I think this time it's no longer the early adopters that happy to take risks, right? I mean, those are probably moved on and already trading on like Binance, FTX, and all that. Obviously, they still use BitOasis for other types of transactions, but these guys are like more sophisticated now users, right?
Yeah.
But you've got this kind of new wave of new customers that are not the early adopters, right? But they do have some experience investing. They're probably investing some money into crypto, but they're like your absolute newbies. And that's a whole kind of different risk appetite with an approach in terms of figuring out, okay, are you regulated? How do you deal with like, my funds, explaining our terms of service. So, that's like a whole kind of different persona. So yeah, that's what I'm saying is like your customer actually changes as well as the
Over
adoption
time, yeah.
cycle grows and grows. Yes.
Is adding new currencies more of a product challenge or a different challenge? Because I believe that's like one of the things that customers want is, it's always every day there's a new, every minute maybe there's a new currency that's coming out or new token that you need to add. How do you go about that?
Yeah, very good question. I feel like a customer is actually asking us this question because we get asked this question quite a lot.
I
I
want to trade
mean,
Dodge
number one,
when you're adding it.
yeah, exactly. Which token do you want, Ray? Let me know. Number one, I mean, it's a huge growth driver, right? People want to trade tokens. People want to find the next, big thing. They want to like bet on like, this token is going to do 10x, 100x. Yeah, it's kind of like investing in stocks as well. Like people do this in financial markets, right? And same in crypto. Now, the difference in crypto is obviously it's a different market dynamic, and there are tokens that are absolutely doing, or teams that are absolutely doing amazing work in terms of tackling a particular challenge, be it in the DeFi space or DAOs or others, or even like like Ethereum as well, and Ethereum like blockchains. And then some that are like, obviously like they're just copycats, right? And it's almost like difficult for people to tell what the difference is. And that's a challenge. I mean, that's a challenge for us as an exchange as well. It's a challenge for the regulators. It's a challenge for the retail customers as well. So for us, we actually do have an internal like due diligence process where we look at the protocol itself, the project overall, right? The stability of the protocol itself, its history of like any compromises, how busy like just the community in terms of like GitHub commits, in terms of like patching up previous issues and vulnerabilities. So all of that obviously. And then looking at the connectivity, so which exchanges have this token traded? Is it like on multiple other platforms? Does it have like healthy 24-hour volume, like liquidity and all of that? Traceability as well in terms of like network analytics tools. Obviously we look at like the actual use case of the token, right? Like it's there with the future applications, developing towards that. It's not just some like copycat that doesn't have in the future. The strength of the team behind it, the community. So, there's like obviously multiple stuff that we look at. I probably have like left out two others, but we do that. And then also the regulators have to approve, right? So that's another thing. Sometimes it can be like a lengthy process. Hard for me to comment in terms of how long it takes. It really kind of varies. And then you've got some tokens that have been around for years, and some new tokens are still quite new, so they're not as battle tested. So yeah, you've got like all of that. Now, for us, it's very important, like listing tokens, because we believe that it's going to be a multi-chain world anyway in BitOasis. It's not just going to be the top blockchains and that's it, or the top tokens in terms of market cap. There will be multiple blockchains tackling multiple, problems that eventually there might be some aspect of interoperability between them as well, but it's not like one winner take all, or even like two or three. Like there are multiple, and that's part of the experimentation of the space as well. It's like you as an exchange have to be able to support those ecosystems and support those projects to also get access for liquidity and trading and all of that, because eventually, I think this whole movement of tokenization will not just be obviously, like Bitcoin investing in gold 2.0, or like let's say tokenizing money. I mean, I think companies will be tokenizing their shares, and they'll be listing on venues like us, right? I think commodities will be tokenized in different forms and shapes as well. NFT, digital art will be tokenized and will be listed on exchanges like us to provide more transparency to the art market as well, and price discovery in the art market. Real estate will also have. So it's like any form of market
It's ownership.
right now.
It's just like basically, you're referring to ownership. So any form of ownership
will be tokenized as an asset or whatever it is, including money, of course, and all of that. So that's why venues are like us, our exchanges, brokerages, we do both, are important to be able to list those tokens, because you're creating new markets for people to buy and sell and trade.
How hard or easy is it for you to enter new markets in the region? Can you operate under your ADGM or whatever license in another market, or do you need to go and get regulated from every single market that you, country you're in the region?
Yeah, very good question. So a disclaimer there. So we've gotten our final approvals from Abu Dhabi Global Markets, HGM. So that's like FSP, Financial Services Permissions. We're in the process of migrating our existing business to HGM. So we're not live under those licenses. And there's obviously like a process, and we really want to make sure the migration goes as smooth as possible to our customers, and all of that. So we're working with the regulators on that. Now, in parallel, we are a reporting entity to the central bank FIU unit in the UAE on a federal level. And then obviously including collaborations with different law enforcement agencies and different entities or authorities in the UAE to make sure our existing platform is obviously fully supervised, monitored until we go live under HM. So on both ends, obviously BitOasis has supervisions and regulation covered. Now, under ADGM, there isn't restriction as such in terms of which markets you serve. Obviously, you've got jurisdictions where you shouldn't be doing business, right? In terms of like sanctioned countries, all of that.
Yeah.
So far, GCC, including, I would say like most parts of the Middle East, give and take, places where we want to do business, right, is pretty flexible. So there isn't a restriction as such, jurisdiction you're serving, so long as that jurisdiction does not have a restriction for you to serve it through the UAE platform, right? So yeah, it's pretty flexible in there. Having said that, right, like, is it a great experience for someone in Saudi to use an offshore platform? Like, what are you bringing to the table versus another international platform, or Binance peer-to-peer, right, in Saudi, which does SAR, like, all of that, right? So you really need to hyper-localize, and localization comes at different levels. So you've got the hyper-localization that we have in the UAE bank accounts, funding in AED, obviously our support, like, 24/7, rolling out chat very, very soon. Integrations on funding, withdrawals, all of that. And that's great. That's fantastic. That's like most optimal, like, most localized experience you can provide your customers. And then you've got Saudi, where people can do and trade Riyal on BitOasis. However, the funding is still offshore or cross-border. Same with other GCC countries. But then ultimately, people want to find an instant, easy way to fund and all of that. And that you get with that hyper localization, getting local licenses, working with the local banks, really building that piping, right, to help you win in that market. But then not every jurisdiction is ready to give you that, right? Like Saudi is still not licensing, Egypt is still not licensing, right? But we're in touch with those regulators, and we actively work with them proactively, I would say, even to kind of get a path forward. But for us, we look at key markets. Depending on the size of the market and the ROI, we figure out whether it's worth investing in a license, right? And getting into this full kind of, building the pipes. So it really depends. However, UAE platform pretty much serves the wider, I would say, GCC region right now, and the Middle East.
At the very beginning, when you started, how did you get your first 100 customers? I think it's usually like one of the most challenging things in any business, getting your first customers in.
So first 20 were like friends and family, basically. So that leaves us with 80. So yeah, no, I mean, it's almost like you have to pay people to come, right? So yeah, we did a bit of that. And really, like, putting the word out in like Twitter and Reddit and the crypto communities that, hey guys, there's a platform that you can use, and like we'll waive the fees and we'll give you like a bonus or a promo to use us. I knew some of the people in the crypto space in the UAE, like they were running meetups and all of that. So kind of like, put the word out in the community, which some of those communities are still very active and pretty big actually right now. Which is very nice to see. So it was a combination of that, right? Promos, tapping into communities where they exist, going on like social media, so yeah, stuff like that.
And then when it was time kind of to scale, and today, is your challenge more on the regulation side or more on getting customers, especially with competition now coming in? You have a lot of international and local players as well that are coming out. I mean, like now driving on Sheikh Zayed, I see like a billboard of an exchange I've never heard of. So how are you going about that in terms of taking that market share?
Ooh, I think it depends on the market, right? For us, like we don't say Middle East and we just see like one country, right? Again, like I mean, even with the Kareem approach, right? It's even down to the city, right? So ultimately, it's like the challenge is different based on the country that we serve, right? Or the country where we want to like grow our market share, and even the competition dynamics, like the competitive dynamics, differ as well, country to country. So we're really getting to that stage actually, where the market is developing in a different pace, in a different way, in some markets over others, which is quite an interesting challenge, right? So I mean, regulatory challenge is always there, and if you ask most people in crypto, I think there was like a recent survey done by one of our investors, DCG Digital Currency Group, where it was like regulatory risk and regulatory challenge is the number one, challenge for companies in crypto. Because, if you're a crypto platform, which is part of your mission to provide a regulated market structure or market, like as a platform, and the regulation is not ready for you to do that, it's like half of your mission is like cut out. So it becomes very difficult, right, to execute. So you want to make sure there's like some readiness on the regulatory side of things. Now, again, we are a startup. We are a high growth startup. We're always going to be ahead of the regulators. I mean, we've been ahead of the regulators here in the UAE, across the region. Like that's just the nature of things, right? And you always want to be closer to the market. Still close to your regulator, but you always want to be on the innovation side of things, right? On the side of like, what do my customers actually want, right? And figure out ways how you can do that. Now, regulation plays a big part, right? It's almost like they have a say on what the product is, indirectly. Maybe proxy through the banks, I don't know. But yeah, combination of those two, basically. So that's a stakeholder that you're going to have to keep managing. And there's not one specific playbook. But it's a thing that you have to
Yeah.
continue managing and maintaining and growing it as you grow your business and stuff like that. So product is on the same level, because here's the thing: it's like when you've got regulation, then you start kind of differentiating, and the differentiation factor is no longer, oh, I have a license, right? You really need to make sure you understand how
There's so
you
much more.
roll out, like best products and all of that. Yeah, but then also like you're competing with global platforms, so also like how do you make sure people are just not like exiting your platform and never coming back? So yeah, it's basically those three things, I would say. On the product side, it's like two segments, but it's like really product and regulation, I think.
Let's talk about differentiation from within. So your team, your culture, that's one of the biggest, most underrated challenges of a founder and CEO. You scaled from 30 to 100 plus now. Uh, what is your approach? First, I would say to hiring, especially when you need to hire and assemble a team of executives. How do you make those hires? How do you find this talent? And how do you make sure that the culture remains, evolves, but remains kind of the way you see it?
Yeah, a lot of it is like work in progress, and I feel like it just keeps changing and molding with almost every new hire that you have as well. So yeah, so it's a pretty big topic. So I think on your point in terms of you differentiate through your product for sure, but you also, I think there's an underrated way of differentiating versus the competition, is your people, right? Making sure that you hire top quality people in every kind of step of the way, and then at every level as well. So it's almost like I always tell everyone on the team is that you have to keep hiring and raising that bar and keep hiring people who are better than the existing people that you have in your team, right? I mean, obviously that differs depending what the role is and who you're hiring, all of that. But all from like, I would say leadership positions all the way down, it's like it really need to make sure that we're hiring to raise the bar. So, you know, that's one. Obviously it's easier said than done. And then, you know, obviously you'll do mistakes. You know, it's not an easy one to get right. So there are like a couple of stuff that I think we've done that I can say we've done right. You know, also time will tell, right? Because a lot of these stuff that we're like doing as we speak right now. So we have scaled from like 30-ish or maybe 40 to like, I think now we're close to like 120 or so in like few months, like 3 or 4 months or so. So hyper scale, obviously, in terms of adding talent. I mean, that growth is still happening actually as we speak right now with even new teams that we didn't have before or haven't existed at BitOasis before, which is all exciting. So one thing that we've done right, and it's also my advice to anyone who's going through that A to B scale, right? Series A to Series B. So you're really like hyper scaling. Is you need to hire a very strong CHR level, like Chief Human Resources level person ASAP before you go through that hyperscale on hiring people. And you may feel like, oh, but you know, I don't have that many people right now. Why do I have to like hire this person and they're gonna have to dictate things? Well, they're gonna like save you a lot of trouble. Because with more people on board, more headache and trouble you're gonna have to deal with. Because you know, guess what, right? People want to see certain things done in a certain way, and then there's this whole kind of set of administrative stuff that you're going to have to do, and then onboarding and making sure that people hit the road running ASAP, and and you know, all of that. And you're going to hire different people, different cultures with different skill sets, and you know, they come with expectations, and you want to make sure, because like the first 90 to 100 days of a new hire is actually what's going to make or break their time in the organization, right? You want to make sure you're setting up everyone to success as much as you can, right? As much as possible. So they can like shorten that time to get the, you know, knowledge download and be able to contribute and add value to the business ASAP, right? So you know, and you need someone to be on top of that, right? And then get that
What do you
download,
look for
you know,
in that person, the head of people HR?
Sorry?
What do you look for in the HR, the head of HR hire? What did you look for from your side? What is the kind of like objectives that you want that person to get
Someone
done?
who's done the same thing that we want to do, or I wanted to do in a different tech company, right? So someone who's done that, you know, been there, done that in other hyper growth tech companies, and there are like a lot of them, obviously, in the region, where they had to go through that really massive, very fast, you know, growth on the people side of things, right? And they know how it goes. They know what can go wrong. They know what, you know, has to be done, and like try to minimize the margin of error as much as possible. And I do this actually with most hiring right now. Hire someone who's done it before, or to some extent, their experience is as close as what you want them to do, so you can minimize the mistakes. I mean, mistakes are going to happen, right? But like, kind of minimize that as much as possible. And but what you need to do as a founder is to be absolutely clear on what you're trying to do, right? So have that clarity in terms of, well, I need that person because I want them to do this over the next 3 to 6 to 12 months or whatever it is, and that's the experience. That's like the experience I'm not going to compromise on. And then go interview, meet people, like, you know, get, I don't know, referrals, references, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Often, I think that the two, like the communication and decision making, are the easiest thing. Seem to be easy when you're like a team of 10 people at the beginning, because It's easy to make decisions very clear. Not easy, but it's clear who makes the decisions, how decisions get made, and same thing with communication. When you went from, or right now you're saying going through it from the 30 to 100 plus, process becomes important, and communication, decision making becomes a lot more difficult and less intuitive in terms of how it gets done. So what's your approach to that in terms of setting up the right process to ensure kind of better communication and decision making?
Also, work in progress. I think we're experimenting quite a lot in that area. So I can't say we got it right. However, I think once every month or so, I try to kind of tweak some of our communication frameworks internally, of course, to see what actually works very well for like teams.
What are you doing right
me
now?
as CEO, leadership team, etc. So like I think once you kind of go above the 150 mark, and I think that's where it becomes a challenge to really align people. And so you need to rely on your executive team to make sure they also communicate very well to their team and other direct reports and team members. So you start kind of relying on other people versus you just like communicating, right? But then not only you start relying on other people as channels, right, for that message, you also rely on different mediums in the sense that, obviously in a meeting, verbally you're communicating things, you're discussing, you're negotiating, blah, 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 etc. But you start realizing that this is not very scalable, right? Because you can't be talking 24/7, and people have work to do, so they're not gonna like just sit in meetings with you. It's just gonna get like very boring. But anyway, but you start like relying on written communication and to some extent even like video or recording videos and like sending it to other teams or other team members for the other team. So like you need to start kind of getting creative on how you communicate certain things. And I'm a fan of writing things because it gives you clarity when you write. It you start kind of seeing your thoughts right in front of you, and then it helps you kind of like really bulletproof your thinking. But then also it's a great way for the other person to really understand what you're trying to say if it's really written in a clear way. So you're not just relying on verbal communication or communicating things to people, but people love that, right? But then people's attention span is very limited as well. So like 15 minutes into the call, like people are like checking their phones. But also you want to like communicate it in a written format, in a fun format, while continue actually iterating and reiterating.
How do you enforce written communication? Do you ask for documentation?
There's a bit of lag on the line, by the way.
Sorry?
I think there's a lag on the line. Can you repeat your question?
I know, yeah. I'm struggling a little bit with connection on my side. I'm saying, how do you enforce communication and written communication? Do you through documentation or minutes of meetings, or how do you enforce that?
Good question. So it's not enforcing communication per se. You need to have good communication skills. And that comes out in the interview, right? So that's one of the core competencies, especially as a manager. So if you're a team lead, a manager, especially if you're in the executive team, so that obviously comes in like for granted. You need to be a good communicator, right? Because if you're going to deal with people, you're going to have to communicate. So that's one thing. So I think actually we have a few people that probably even struggle with that. So the thing is, it's like people should be utilizing meetings, and actually that's what I iterate and reiterate so many times. We're not blocking people's calendars, right, to communicate stuff that we can write. Right? Oh, what happened last week? I don't know. Blah blah blah. Here are the updates, right? The hour or 45 minutes that you have in a meeting should be dealt with so preciously that what you're doing in that meeting is actually discussing the challenges around what happened or what you want to discuss, or so you come in with an actual context already given to people who are attending that meeting. of what has to be discussed. So people come in already with ideas, and so obviously that excludes like blue sky thinking, brainstorming sessions, all that's like different, right? We're just kind of talking about like the day-to-day meetings that happen, and weekly management meetings, like stuff like that, right? You already communicate the updates. So the updates that you communicate are written, right? But what happens in the meeting is stuff that you cannot communicate through writing things, because it's just not a great way for people to like communicate ideas by writing it down. It's just like obviously it's not very interactive. So that's like where it kind of and it starts people started getting used to it, which is great. It almost becomes a habit. Like, I'm not going to sit down with you for an hour to hear what your updates. You can just like freaking send it to me on a bullet point. Great.
Yeah.
I'll read it and I'll be like, amazing. Thank you very much. Right? I don't need to do that in a meeting. What I need to do is discuss with you what I think about those points and what challenges are and potentially how we can solve it, right, together. So so it's like really kind of shifting that mindset and that thinking, which, people before are like, oh, here's what I did yesterday. I was like, just gonna like, just send it on an email. We don't need to sit in a meeting for that. So anyways, it's just like a bit of that. So yeah.
That makes sense. When it comes to culture, and I want to ask you about company politics specifically, that's something that a lot of founders deal with as their company scales. How do you avoid politics or control company politics as you're scaling?
Very good question. I mean, I think people or humans by nature are political animals. So I think there's an aspect of human psychology that we should be able, as leaders, regardless what the industry that you're in or the space you're in, I mean, it's understanding human psychology is important, and I think it kind of helps you ultimately avoid certain things, but then certain things happen, and it just happens because we're humans. But I mean, regardless, right? There's certain things that you can do. And I mean, I'm not saying that. I mean, I'm no expert. I mean, I think in that area at all. But I think when you start growing your business and you start like growing the number of people that you have in the company and the teams, you start kind of noticing these things, and it's almost like they just happen organically, right? It's just like, because we're humans, we're social animals, and all of that. But I think there's certain things that you can do to make it better, right? And make sure that ultimately the social behavior doesn't create a condition where it's a culture that is toxic, right? Or you've got that fostering in a way that makes people uncomfortable and not wanting to or succeed or flourish in that particular environment. And I think it all kind of always starts at the top. The founders, the executive team, ultimately kind of, to some extent, it's not a replica of the founder, but it mimics, like, the values are shared. It has to be like a meritocracy, right? I mean, ultimately, the right person should be at the right place. And people see that, people notice that. And, it's like, there's certain things that, like, people are able to see through other people, right? So I think like meritocracy, having the right person in the right place is one part. Not exercising any favoritism, again, like meritocracy as well, is also another part. I mean, it's I think something even like Arab leaders, like, well, maybe we shouldn't go there, but in the sense that, like, a lot of problems in the region could be easily solved by introducing meritocracy and not exercising favoritism. So that's like the top one, right? And then the other stuff is you have to hold people accountable, right? So you have to have a culture of accountability, because ultimately, that's how you demonstrate to people, is that if you do a good thing, then there's a reward. If you don't do something that is, or if you do something that is not acceptable based on the values or the code of ethics you've got in the company, then there's also consequence to that, right? Like, I'm not saying you go punish people, but you hold them accountable, right? You address it, you demonstrate how it should have been handled differently, and you as a leader have to demonstrate to people, right? Because that's how people learn. Like you don't just say, oh, don't do that, but you also have to demonstrate how it should be done. So yeah, it's just like aspects of that. I mean, again, like I think a lot of what we're doing is trialing and erroring. I mean, even in my mind, like things change as the company changes. So I mean, I could be saying a completely different thing 3 months from now. I definitely wouldn't be saying that 3 months ago, but yeah. So
Yeah, things evolve very quickly. And
yeah,
so on the
exactly.
culture side,
I'd be like,
and
Ray, everything I said in the podcast, please scrap it out. Let's do the interview all over again.
it's continuously evolving kind of like thing. But when it comes to so conflict resolution within your culture and dealing with conflict within like people from your executive team or different people from within your team when they have conflict among each other, how do you address that when two people come and say, or someone says that they're in a conflict with someone else?
Cool. So I think conflict is good and conflict is healthy. I mean, to some extent, I feel like if people are not getting into conflict, I'm like, oh, something is wrong. Like someone is not speaking their minds, right? So to begin with, I think
Yeah.
like it's great to approach conflict from the mindset of great, people are discussing ideas, they get into conflict. That's amazing. Now, obviously, like conflict is a very generic word, so different conflicts have different issues and causes and all of that. So I don't think there's like one way to deal with conflict. I mean, I always hope that conflict got resolved before it comes to me, right? The reality, obviously, that sometimes happens and that sometimes doesn't happen. If there's conflict, I think it has to be addressed ASAP, especially among like executives or let's say key people in the company, all of that. I mean, all conflict, but specifically that, because you don't want something that goes unresolved eventually grow way out of proportion, and then again it kind of starts affecting the culture and the teams and how effective they are. So you really like have to tackle conflict ASAP, and then there's potentially conflict that I think it makes sense for me to step in, and other conflicts where I'm like, well, guys, you're just gonna have to resolve it yourself, right? You should have the ability to resolve like a conflict. So it really kind of depends, I think, on the magnitude eventually, but that's where I think, kind of going back to your point, how do you avoid politics? I think you have to approach it from the perspective of you have to treat people equally, listen, and like engage. Obviously, if it's a conflict that requires you to step in, but then really make sure you're doing the best to the business, because ultimately when people realize that everything they were doing or every decision you're taking or whatever it is for the benefit of the company, eventually I think that's where people start realizing there's no favoritism here, right? Like, so just like it's very generic, right? But it depends, I think, ultimately. Now I think obviously there's like conflicts that, yeah, I mean they happen every day, right? But conflict resolution and figuring out how to tackle that is something that I actually iterate and reiterate quite a lot to the team. Conflicts do happen. It's healthy. People should voice out their opinions and they should debate and all of that. But there should also be a way that you're able to resolve conflict in a way where it doesn't get to a point where like someone's ego is overpowering someone. So it's like stuff like that. It's just like it's not cool. So yeah.
Yeah. I want to ask you about something that's usually not talked about much among founders, which is how do you deal with your own psychology as a CEO and a founder, making sure you don't go insane, while running the company.
Whoa, okay, Ray, that needs a whole different podcast. So yeah, I mean it's a tough one, right? Right. I mean, I think if you ask any founder, like it's a roller coaster, right? I mean, some days you're like, oh, this is the most amazing thing in the world, blah, blah, blah. And then like the next day you're like, oh shit, you know,
Depressed.
NGMI, we're not gonna take yeah, or like whatever it is. Yeah, exactly. So yeah. So yeah, it's a roller coaster. I mean, I think ultimately, you get to a point where like, okay, you realize, look, some days are gonna be great, some days not. And just kind of like try to kind of take emotions out of the equation, right? I mean, I think that's like one of the struggles. You know, I find some founders, I mean, I haven't met all the founders in the world, so I can't like talk on behalf of founders. But like I see, you know, some founders, you know, kind of get like so emotionally invested and yeah, it can be like pretty tough if you do that. But the reality, I think, like, you know, once you get to a point where, look, you go there, you do your best, some things work and some things are not going to work. And you're just going to have to keep trying until it works, right? And if you have enough conviction that actually what you're working on is actually sensible, you know, maybe your
Yeah.
idea sucks and that's it, and you just stop. But anyway, the reality is that you're just going to have to take emotions out of the equation and like just do it for the fun of it and because you love doing this, but don't get like way too attached to it.
Is it
It's
taking
yeah.
is it taking emotions completely out or controlling like your emotions? I think like sometimes you want to keep that kind of like some things require like some emotion, you know, in terms of like when you're running a business, but you want to
Oh
control
yeah,
them
yeah,
at the same time.
very good point. Well, perhaps exactly because you know you're a human being at the end of the day. Well, I get taking the emotions out or controlling your emotions. I think probably controlling your emotions is a better way of putting it because the reality is you can't just be surgical about it, right? So yeah, I think that's a better way of actually saying it is like
Yeah.
you want to become a stoic essentially. You should control your reaction to what happens to the outside world. What happens to the outside world is something not for you to dictate or control, but how you react to it
Yeah.
is ultimately. Yeah, so definitely yes, a stoic approach to things. I agree.
That's awesome. As we reach the end of of our time here, what is next for BitOasis?
What's next for BitOasis? Very good question. I mean, we're definitely focused on growth. We're all heads down, excited about what we do, and taking a long-term approach to building this company and being in the space, and you know, being a market leader in the space as well. It's an exciting space that you know. I think the upside is just massive, right? And it's not just the region. I think crypto overall. So we are committed to the region as well, right? I mean, we were born in the Middle East. We're committed to making sure that the crypto ecosystem and this industry grows as well as we grow. So for us, it's, you know, being live in new markets, licenses in other markets, really give the opportunity for like hundreds of thousands to millions of people. That's obviously like in the next 2 to 3 years, right? To millions of people access to crypto and buying and selling and securely trading. DeFi and NFTs is on the horizon, 100%. I mean, we definitely need to venture, you know, outside of the exchange space, and that's how I see us as a, you know, crypto platform, right? We're not just means for people to buy, sell, and trade. So really like getting into different verticals in crypto, becoming a crypto platform, a one-stop shop for people to do what, you know, beyond just buying and selling and trading, and then being live in various markets across the region and outside of the region as well. So huge plans. I think, you know, if you're in crypto and you're not taking a long-term approach, then you're not going to reap the, you know, real rewards of this space. But also, it's just fun seeing how things are growing in crypto. It's just like it's exciting. So yeah.
Yeah, this is awesome. Now, you guys built an amazing company so far. And if people want to reach you personally, what are you most active on? Are you on Twitter? On what is the best way to reach you?
Twitter for sure. You can DM me. I mean, I'm not always like actively tweeting and stuff. I do check my Twitter though. So if you do message me, we'll get back to you at some point. That would be the platform that I would recommend 100%. All the rest, I'm like, I have accounts, but not like.
Yeah, I'm only on, like, mainly on Twitter. That's where I live.
Yeah, please don't send me a message on LinkedIn. Also, on that note, like LinkedIn messages, no,
You're never gonna
like
see it.
your message is gonna be like drowning and sucked in like with hundreds other messages. So like, please, Twitter, your go-to place.
Also, thank you very much for joining. It was really great chatting with you.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks for having me. That was so much fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you like this podcast and want to listen to more episodes, subscribe to the Meta Conversations podcast on one of your favorite podcast channels.